Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you can see and hear me pretty well. If you were here last week for Teodora Talks Tech, welcome back. If this is your first time, welcome, and thank you for taking a little bit of time today to join me and to hear a little bit about this topic that we're going to be talking about. In case you don't know, this is a five-part series on digital wellness. So last week I talked about a kind of a digital wellness 101, introduced some of the sort of basic topics within this field, and took a little bit of time to define what digital wellness is and how we want to kind of go about employing it in our lives and using our technology in more healthy, more supportive ways. So today for episode 2, we're going to be talking about this really fascinating phenomenon of social media and how it plays into the needs of our social brain. And next week for episode 3, it's going to be same time, same place. I really hope you'll join me because I'll be talking about one of my favorite topics within this kind of bigger field of digital wellness, and that is children and technology. So I hope you'll be here for that. So just to introduce myself again, in case you don't know me, my name is Teodora Pavkovic. I'm a psychotherapist and a parenting coach, and I specialize in emotional intelligence, digital wellness, and parenting in the age of technology, which is why I love to talk about all of these different topics and really take them apart and try and give people as many kind of useful, practical tips on some of these topics as much as I can. I'm also an advisory board member of Made of Millions. So, Made of Millions is the wonderful mental health advocacy group that has just recently been launched and that has brought a really big group of us together to try and raise awareness on a lot of different topics around mental health issues. And so I'm really, really proud and very honored to get this opportunity to be the first one to kick off the live series for Made of Millions. And I get to talk about my favorite topic, which is absolutely wonderful. So if you would like a little bit more information about either myself or Made of Millions, you can see down on the bottom of your screen in the ticker where you can follow us on, interestingly enough, and ironically enough, social media. And if you'd like any more information, additional information about any of the things that I'll be talking about, if you would like more resources, or if you would just kind of like to send me your comments, please feel free to do that either in the comment section here. And I see a few good mornings there already. So good morning to you guys. Thank you for joining us. But you can also send me an email as well, and you'll see that down in the ticker as well. So let's get started. Let's dive in. I think for me, the story of social media is really a story about being social, not necessarily in the sense of kind of hanging out together. At an event, having drinks, which, by the way, who doesn't miss that at this point? But it's really about that very visceral, kind of biological, sort of primal sense that I'm talking about here. So it's that need that your social brain has to connect with other brains in a very direct way in order to develop fully and healthily. And I think many of you already will know that we have social brains. We talk about that really frequently. But I think it's also important to know that there is an extensive amount of research at this point that shows us very clearly that our brains literally cannot develop in a healthy kind of a way unless we directly connect to other human beings who are caring and who are nurturing. And so we really need many of those caring and nurturing experiences in order for our brains to physically, so literally physically, to grow in size, but also to develop all those connections inside that we need in order to be able to kind of be fully functional human beings. And I think one of the studies or the pieces of research that showed this most clearly in quite a heartbreaking way actually was a study that came out of Romania many years ago now at this point, out of an orphanage there, where they were able to show that the children who weren't receiving a lot of direct attention, who weren't being touched a lot, who weren't being kind of picked up and cuddled and stroked, who didn't receive a lot of direct eye contact, a lot of that kind of baby talk as we refer to it, their brains were literally not able able to develop enough. Their brains weren't big enough, and they weren't hitting some of those milestones that children typically do. And so I think that study really showed us very clearly just how important it is for us to really satisfy those social needs that our brain has. It is almost a kind of a life or death situation. So when we look at the very extreme, what do we find? Kind of what do we find in instances when our brain doesn't have other human beings there with which it can connect? I always like to use this example for those of you who maybe don't recognize this. The younger members of our audience maybe don't. This is a movie called Castaway with Tom Hanks that came out quite a number of years ago now, maybe as many as about 20 years ago, 15 or 20 years ago. It's a really fascinating movie, I think, when it comes to this topic of social isolation. Anytime I do workshops or trainings on this topic, I always mention this movie, and oftentimes I'll show a clip too. But this is a movie in which Tom Hanks' character gets stranded on an island after his plane crashes, and you can see here on the left side of your screen the volleyball made by the company Wilson. That he takes a look at there. If you look at the right side of your screen, what you end up seeing there is a number of days down the line. Tom Hanks actually creates a kind of a character, a personality out of Wilson. He also calls him Wilson, and as you can see there, he's put on a little bit of hair on him. If you could see the front, he also during one pretty dramatic scene uses his blood to draw a face on Wilson as well. And you can see there that he's actually having a very kind of heated discussion or a very kind of heated debate with Wilson, in which he kind of yells at him and curses at him and so on. So I don't want to tell you much more for those of you who haven't seen this movie, but it's a really brilliant demonstration of what happens to us when we don't have human beings around us. I think right now in this time of physical distancing, when we are feeling a little bit of social isolation, I think this is a really interesting thing to think about and to consider how all of us are reacting to the fact that we're having to physically stay away from other human beings. But I think this movie really shows exceptionally well what ends up happening in that case. Our brain needs to have that other human being there so desperately that it will just create one. It will make one up out of any objects that are available. And this isn't an entirely a kind of unimaginable thing to happen. Many of you will probably remember that when you were children, you had the tendency to do that, and that is just a normal part of development. But I think it is a really great illustration of what our brain needs, and even more research over the past maybe kind of 10 or 15 years has really gone into the details of why that is exactly, of why our brain needs other people so desperately. And so this is some of the research that has come out in a wonderful book called Wired to Connect, written by Dr. Amy Banks. I also use this book a lot whenever I do my trainings on the neuroscience of relationships, what a healthy brain looks like, what a brain within relationships looks like. And I think these are interesting things to talk about as we talk about social media and how we actually use social media and what are some of the requirements of our brain, how we can help our brain help us really to again develop and live in a healthy, a kind of good quality way. And in this book, Amy Banks answers this question of what does our brain need, and she looked at four neural pathways in particular. I'm not going to get too geeky on you and go into the details of it, but I just think the most important thing to know is really what do these different pathways within our brains, within our organisms do? What are they in charge of, and how do they make us feel? And as I'm kind of talking about this, I also encourage you to think about your own social media use, whatever those platforms may be, in whichever ways you use your social media. Do some of those interactions that you have help you feel any one or more of these four things? And if they don't, a little bit later on, I'll be talking about what are some of the ways in which we can change the way we use our social media. So the most basic requirement of any really living creature on this planet, human beings in particular, is safety, feeling a sense of safety. And what Amy Bank talks about really, really well in her book is how we communicate safety to each other as human human beings. One of the ways in which we do it is by using a certain tone of voice. So hopefully at this moment, I'm not talking to you in a kind of threatening way. Hopefully my voice is pretty relaxing, pretty soothing for you, is enabling you to open up your mind, to become curious, and to really take in the things that I'm saying. And you probably feel quite safe in this kind of relation that the two of us have virtually at this point. If I were to very quickly, rapidly, suddenly change the tone of my voice and make it sound very kind of threatening, very aggressive, very short words, if I change the kind of what we call the prosody of my voice, I would probably induce you to feel a lot less safe. Of course, again, we're communicating virtually, so there's no physical danger there. But if you picture yourself in the world surrounded by other people, it's very important for you to be able to listen to other people, watch them, observe them, and make sure that you feel very safe in relation to them. And you do have a system inside of your body and your brain that makes sure that you can detect safety, but that you can also communicate safety to other people. So it's very interesting to think about social media and think about those communications interactions that we have, and do they actually satisfy this need of safety that we have. The second thing that we need, and again, this won't be any surprise to you, is we really need to feel a sense of belonging with each other. And the research in this particular field came out a little bit kind of accidentally and surprisingly as well. Research was being done on what kind of parts of our brain get activated when we feel socially excluded, socially isolated, and socially rejected in particular. And what the researchers found, and they did this through a relatively kind of simple study, just looking at a game of passing the ball to each other, they found that the same part of our brain that lights up when we feel physical pain also lights up when we feel socially isolated or socially rejected. And so, again, going back to this time, it's very difficult not to talk about the kind of physical distancing situation that we're in right now. A lot of us are probably feeling a huge lack of belonging and a huge lack of connection, especially those of us who unfortunately are living alone and are kind of quarantined and closed up in their own houses or apartments. So we really do experience pain when we are socially isolated. And so if you are experiencing a lot of pain during this time in particular, I just hope that this will give you just a little bit of a kind of sense of comfort, or at least understanding in terms of when it comes to your brain, why you're feeling this way right now. The sense of belonging is incredibly important. And so again, how much of that does your social media use actually give you? The third one is mirroring, and this one is a very interesting one. Again, the findings in this area came out accidentally. This need that we have to be able to feel like another person really gets us, like they're mirroring what we're saying or how we're feeling, using their body gestures to mimic ours. When this was done through research that was done with monkeys in a lab, the researcher very accidentally found that. When he moved a water bottle with his hand, the parts of the monkey's brain that also control right hand movement were lighting up, even though the monkey himself actually wasn't moving his hand. So what this means is, and we believe that the same is most likely to be true in human beings, although of course the same study hasn't been replicated. But the fact that even now, while you're watching me speak, you probably aren't speaking yourself. But if we were to connect your brain up, we would probably find that the parts of your brain that control the movement of the whole kind of bottom part of your face are also lighting up right now as you are watching me. And of course, it would be wonderful if we were in the same room together, because then I would be able to see how your physical posture is in line with mine, and you would also get a sense of that from me. Of course, we don't get to do that very much on social media. We have the ability to obviously video stream and watch other people's videos, so there's a little bit of it there. But this is one of the areas that's probably kind of most, let's say, endangered by social media. Our need for mirroring isn't really well reflected within social media, especially if you think about the selfie culture and the kind of the perfection of, I don't know, 90% of selfie photographs that doesn't quite mirror you as you're sitting on your couch in the morning in your pajamas watching these kind of perfectly curated photographs or videos. So that whole component of mirroring is very interesting interesting and also very important when we talk about empathy, the ability to empathize with each other. We need to be able to see each other, be present with each other, and we really reflect things to each other in order to be able to develop our sense of empathy, compassion, kindness, and so many other ones. Finally, we're talking about energy. And this is a very interesting one because this kind of applies to that whole concept of our reward system, which again, many of you would have heard of. We always talk about dopamine as a neurotransmitter and neurochemical that is very important within this particular component. But what a lot of the research that Dr. Banks put together indicated was that we really do have this need to feel energized in our connections with other people. Those are the relationships and the connections that help our brain develop in the best way. When you're interacting with somebody who, once you've left them, you feel as though they gave you this huge surge of energy. And I always like to ask people to think about some of the people who they surround themselves by on a daily basis. Most of us will have at least that one person who it feels like sucks out all of the energy from the room. And then you will have other people, oftentimes these will be members of your family or your best friends, who after you've spent some time with them, you really do feel as though you've just gained this huge amount of energy that you didn't have before you started speaking to them. So these are the kind of the four areas that I would really encourage you to think about as you're using your social media. These are the needs that your brain has, regardless of where in the world you live, regardless of how old you are. The need to feel safe, to feel like you belong, to feel like the other person is mirroring you in the state that you're in that moment, and energy. We require all four of these things. And so the question is, how well are we able to satisfy them when it comes to our social media use, and what is the kind of the neuroscience of social media look like? So as promised, I'm not going to geek out on you too much when it comes to brain structure and what the different parts of the brain do. I personally find these things fascinating with my kind of psychology and clinical psychology background, but not everybody does. But I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of some of the latest research that is being done in this field, because what some researchers in Germany and in Texas here in the US are trying to figure out is, are the same parts of our brain that light up when we're in actual physical kind of real life social interactions, do they light up the same way when we're on social media as well? And so a lot of this is still preliminary research. We're still kind of waiting to figure out the results that are going to come in. But I think this is very interesting because as these researchers mentioned, social media definitely provides us with a platform on which we can at least attempt to satisfy some of our social drives. And these ones obviously we've had forever. Social media hasn't suddenly brought these things onto us, but there are three things in particular that we tend to do in our actual physical relationships with other people, or rather real life relationships, that social media may be able to satisfy. And again, I encourage you to think about your own social media use as I mentioned these three different things. So the first thing that kind of social media allows us to do really is to think about how other people think and how other people feel and how other people respond. So we talk about mentalizing when we talk about that, and we catch ourselves doing that all the time, right? You're sensing what other people may think even before you post something. As you're posting it, you think about, well, what is this going to look like? So for example, I did that while I was putting together these slides for you today, thinking in terms of, are you going to like these colors? Are you going to be able to see some of these fonts? Are they going to be easy to read, and so on? And part of why I was doing that, of course, and part of why we think about how others think, is because we care about what they think about us. And so again, in my example, I would want you to see me as a professional, as somebody who knows what they're talking about, as somebody who put care into these slides in order to really maximize your learning experience right now. And so that was me mentalizing. And that is something that we, of course, do to a huge extent on social media as well. The second thing is that we think about ourselves a lot, right? By nature, humans are very self-centered creatures. Of course, in many cases, that helps us survive. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's perfectly fine. But the thing is that then again, once we put out that content about ourselves, trying to a lot of people use the word curate, to curate ourselves or to curate our brand, which is another kind of popular term. We also then use the feedback we get in return, the likes, the shares, the comments, in order to then further think about ourselves. And this is where one of the kind of troubling aspects of social media use comes in. Our brain has that need to share information about ourselves, to present ourselves in a certain way, because then we're waiting to hear what other people are going to say and what they're going to think, right? None of us post on social media wanting to have 0 views and 0 likes and 0 shares and 0 comments. That's not the point. The whole point is that we get feedback, and then it's almost as though we wait for that to let us know whether we are professional, competent, knowledgeable, attractive, desirable, funny, whatever the case may be, right? So that plays a huge role in the way we use social media. Finally, we go back to that energy component, and these researchers talk about that as well. They talk about the reward system and the reward network, and how important it is. And again, all of us know this. As soon as you get that like, you get a comment, you get a share, you get somebody telling you, "This is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this. This was so useful. This has got me thinking about things, or this was helpful to me." Whatever it might be, that reward system gets activated, and it's a wonderful thing that we have this reward system because it makes us feel really, really good, and then it motivates us to continue our behavior, in whatever direction we find appropriate. Um, so these are the kind of three behaviors that we show or that we exhibit on social media. And another interesting question that I want to kind of ask you now to have a think about is, when you compare your social media interactions, or whatever it might be, your virtual or your digital reactions, and you compare them to your actual real life interactions with people, what difference there do you see in terms of how you end up thinking about yourself, or how you end up feeling about yourself, how you end up conceptualizing yourself? Because I think that is one really, really important element in this whole conversation again. And if you watched my previous episode last week, you would have seen this picture, this piece of art really, that was created by an artist in Canada called I Heart, and it's called Nobody Likes Me. And it's, for me, especially because I work a lot with children, it's a very difficult picture to look at. It certainly doesn't make me feel good, because it's this picture of a very small child with this very kind of painful, distraught, kind of desperate look on their face, because they've gotten 0 comments and 0 likes and 0 shares, which is just what we were talking about now. So how does that use of social media make you feel, and the interactions that you have with other people when you see those zeros? How does that make you feel? And do you ever find yourself experiencing similar things in real life, in your real life interactions? You're probably unlikely to. So I think that is one of the most interesting things that we can talk about in terms of how we use social media, because we use it for a lot of different things. And again, this was a graph that I shared with you guys last week as well, because I think it is a really important question to really look at the details of what are all the different things we're doing on social media. When we started talking about digital wellness, before it even became digital wellness a few years ago, we talked a lot about screen time and how much time were we spending on whatever it might be, games or social media, texting, anything else. We quickly found out that that is a really kind of a black and white, very incomplete view of our digital lives in general, and that we really need to change the concept of screen time into something that researchers are now calling the screenome, which basically just means what are all the different things that you're actually doing via your screen, or your screen-based device. And so this little piece of research that came out of the UK that looked at 14 to 24-year-olds, I think shows us in a really nice way what are all of the different kind of social interactions that we're having on social media. So in terms of how we connect with other people, what are some of the reasons for it, but then also in terms of how we feel about ourselves then, at the end of whatever our social media cycle is, those 5 minutes that we use it for, or 2 hours, or whatever it might be, in your case. Because again, as I talked about on that previous slide, our social interactions have so much to do with how we see and think about ourselves, and how we feel about ourselves and other people as well. And it's a very, very kind of, it's a two-way street. It's a highly interactive process. So you can see here that at least that 14 to 24-year-old age group, but I do think this applies to those of us who are older as well, are using social media for a bunch of different things. They're doing it for building communities and getting some emotional support. It's impacting their self identity, their ability to self express. There are also the negative sides of it too when it comes to bullying, when it comes to things like body image, the famous FOMO, so the fear of missing out. Of course, in a very physical sense, it does affect our sleep as well, which is, of course, not ideal. But it also contributes to raising awareness about people's health, which, again, given the current situation we're in, is really, really important. But we have a really nice overview here of how we're using social media and what are the different aspects of ourselves, our own kind of sense of ourselves it's affecting. And you can see that it's not all created equal. So while certain platforms like let's use Instagram, for example, seem to be great for self expression. And a lot of people in that age group feel very good about their ability to be able to self express on Instagram. When it comes to their body image, it seems to have a very, very negative effect. And of course, we know that when it comes to girls in particular, and I will talk about that in a little bit more detail. We know that Instagram and Snapchat and Facebook, to certain extents, can have a very negative impact on that. But here you can clearly see that when it comes to our sense of our body, the use of Instagram can have a very, very negative effect. When you look at Snapchat, for example, when it comes to the fear of missing out, it has a very, very strong impact on that. But again, when it comes to things like emotional support, self-identity, self-expression, it seems to be pretty good. When it comes to that, so this is something else to be mindful of as we move forward and we think about how we can maybe change some of our social media use behaviors. And I think these are some of the questions that again can guide us when it comes to that. I think these questions are really the essence of what I'm talking about when I talk about social media and digital wellness. With this episode in particular, I'm really talking about brain wellness and really satisfying some of those very basic needs that our brain has developed in order to help us grow and live with better mental health, social health, emotional health, and so on. So one of the key questions for me really is what is that gap between the expectation and what we actually receive. So what are your expectations of social media as you engage with it, and what do you actually end up getting from it? And if there's a very big discrepancy there, what are some of the ways in which you can maybe adjust your social media use, whether it just means using it a lot less or using it differently, so that you can match those two things up a little bit more, because you definitely will feel better once those two are much better aligned. The second question kind of feeds off of the first one. How can we really use social media more mindfully and intentionally? I kind of highlight and underline this word use, or use rather, because for me, a really key component of digital wellness and the use of social media is really the idea that you are using it, that you are consenting to using it in a very purposeful, intentional, very self-aware kind of a way. I talked a little bit about things like persuasive design in the last episode, and the ways in which many of our screen based devices, our apps, our platforms are designed in a way to keep us there for very long periods of time, and kind of mindlessly there too. So the infinite scroll is one example of that. And when it comes especially to platforms such as Instagram and Facebook, this is a kind of tip I always give to parents when it comes to really helping their children develop digital wellness and self-awareness. The question is, how do we know when it's enough of Instagram or Facebook, when there is no end to it? You can just keep going and going and going and going. So, how do we use it in a mindful, intentional way? It could be things like saying, I'm going to use it for 5 minutes, literally. I will set a timer. And when the 5 minutes is over, no matter what I'm doing, I will close it up, put it away, and I will come back to it sometime later. And don't worry, by the way, all the same content is still going to be there. It's there forever, right? So it will still be there. You can be assured when it comes to that. Or it could be there are certain people with whom I want to engage online. Again, when it comes to the previous two slides, when I talked to you about what are the social drives that we have and what are the needs of our brain, are we using social media in such a way that those needs are satisfied? And are all the people we interact with helping us to satisfy those needs? If they're not, then maybe we do need to disengage from them. Dare I say, defriend them? How can we define a clear purpose for social media in our lives? What is it? So an example that I always like to give is a platform like Pinterest, for example, that is also very visually stimulating and can be very engrossing. That is a platform that we can easily kind of build a fence around. I like to to talk about digital wellness as building a fence around it. If you're about to get married, or if you're about to design the interior of your apartment, or you want to put together an outfit, whatever it is, using it for that purpose and for that period of time is incredible, because it can be incredibly inspirational and creative and so on. But then once your wedding is over, or you've put that outfit together, or you've set up your apartment, if there isn't really much of a need to be on the platform anymore, then you can close it up, not access it, or just take it off your phone or your computer altogether, because you no longer need it. Otherwise, it's going to be yet another form of media that is really drawing your attention and your time, because remember, time is incredibly finite. There's only so much of it. There's 24 hours in every day, and there's so many things that we want to be able to get to. The last thing we really want to do is have apps on our screen-based devices that will just be time suckers, as I like to call them. So one example I wanted to give you of how we can change the way we use social media was actually a kind of a small experiment or a study that was carried out by the Female Lead. They're a wonderful women-centered nonprofit organization that I would really encourage you to look up. But they did a little study where they asked teenage girls to use their social media differently. They didn't ask them to defriend anyone. They didn't ask them to unfollow anyone. The only thing they said, and this was with girls 14 to 17 years old, they asked them what are their interest areas, and then they gave them suggestions to 4 women who they could follow. Each of these women was somehow involved in some of these areas of interest, and over a very short period of time, they found some incredible changes in the way these young teenage girls were not just relating to social media, but it changed completely their concept of social media and the role that it started to play in their life, which again, then going back to some of those slides before, changed the way they thought about themselves and the way they felt about themselves. And some of them reported back saying things like, I had no clue that this is what social media could be. I had no idea that this was the role that it could play in my life. And again, don't forget that because of the ways in which all of these algorithms are created, and all these social media platforms, once your behavior starts to change on them, so once you start, for example, following different people, the content that is suggested to you then or recommended to you will change as well. So for example, a few of these girls were really interested in space, in outer space, in the planets, space exploration, astronauts, NASA, and so on. And so once they started following female scientists or astronauts, some of the suggestions that they were getting were then contributing to that kind of new track of interest. So they were getting suggestions on exploration, on curiosity, on investigation, entrepreneurship, scientific study, NASA, the history of NASA, other women who are also in a similar field, or other discoveries, also within that kind of that same area of scientific research. So once you change your behavior on your social media, you will notice that the social media itself will change as well, and in a positive way this time. So I think these are really some of the keys that we want to be thinking about in terms of changing our online behavior. And I just wanted to kind of give you another reminder. Again, if you were with me last week, you would have seen my definition of digital wellness and what being digitally well actually means. I think it's very important, maybe mostly important, when we talk about social media in particular. So being digitally well really means using technology, again, mindfully, intentionally, and humanely, in such a way that it doesn't tarnish your psychological and emotional well-being, or the psychological and emotional well-being of other people. Because again, remember that our social drives have as much to do with other people as they do with us. We rely on, yes, our own daydreaming and our own curiosity, and our own kind of mentalizing inner thinking process to define who we are and to kind of figure out who we are. But we can't really do that without other people. We need to always refer to other people in order to be able to do that. And I wanted to wrap up, just give you one really wonderful example of how I've seen social media being used recently. Again, going back to this physical distancing that we're going through right now. I don't like to use the term social distancing, and I'm happily seeing a lot of different people change their language around this as well. I like to call it social nearing, and so this is a hashtag that I've started using on social media, because I would really like to encourage people to think about social nearing, especially again in this time when we are physically isolated, and where we will be feeling a lot of pain, emotional pain, possibly even physical pain as a result of that. So hopefully Dr. Kaufman won't mind that I shared this tweet. Again, it was tweeted out onto a public arena. So I would imagine that he would be fine with it. But he's one of the people who I follow on social media, on Twitter in particular. I can say that following him definitely satisfies all of those different needs that my brain has. So I'm very happy to be following him. But this was a tweet that he put out a couple of days ago. So on the 11th of March, saying, if your anxiety levels are sky high right now and you feel scared and alone, raise your hand in this thread so at least we can see that we're all in the same boat. And he started off by raising his hand. And it was wonderful to look through some of the responses that people were giving. There was one person in particular who said that they were in their kind of mid to late 60s. They had to isolate themselves and self-quarantine for their own sake, but for the sake of others as well. But they live alone. And so they were feeling incredibly alone, incredibly scared, very, very worried about the current situation. And so somebody else replied to that saying, I'm so sorry that you're by yourself. Please make sure to check in with us here on Twitter every so often, every hour or couple of hours, especially if you start feeling unwell, and we'll be here for you. We'll help you in any way that we possibly can. And I think that was just a wonderful example of how we can use social media in a way that it really satisfies all of those needs that our brain has and all of those social drives that we have to reach out to other people, to connect with other people. So I would really encourage you to think about that as you move forward. If you're watching a recording of this video, and if it's I don't know, many years down the road from where we are today, it's March of 2020. Even if everything that is going on today with coronavirus is over, I hope that this kind of behavior is going to stick, and that we're going to really amplify this very positive, very humane use of social media as we move forward. So thank you so much again for being here. Went over time a little bit. I could talk about these topics for a very, very long time, but I think it will be good to wrap it up here. Thank you for everyone who watched us. Thank you guys so much for saying hello, for saying good morning. I hope that I gave you some kind of useful, practical tips, some kind of food for thought as you move forward. That will be the idea with each one of these episodes. I always want to make sure that as you walk away from this, you take some of these ideas with you, and that then will impact your behavior in terms of how you use technology yourself, but in terms of opening up some of these conversations with other people as well, in terms of how they use their own social media. Again, please feel free to follow both myself and the organization Made of Millions. Again, if you would like any further information, any additional tips, resources, anything like that, you can either follow me mindfully and intentionally on social media, or you can send me an email as well, and I'll be sure to reply to you. And again, if you're interested in the topic of children and technology, which, like I said, is one of my favorites, please be sure to tune in next week. That will be again Monday, March 30th. Again, 10 a.m. Eastern time. I'm coming to you live from New York City, from just across the Hudson River in New Jersey. So I will be here again at that point, unpacking the topic of children and technology. If you have friends who are parents, please let them know about this as well, because I think in, again, the current times that we're in, with a lot of this social isolation, the way children in particular are using technology is really changing. And if we're talking about screen time again, screen time is definitely going up when it comes to how they're using technology. But I think it's really important to look at what they're actually doing with their devices, and based on that, to kind of figure out if they're using their technology in those very nurturing, supportive kind of ways, especially now that a lot of learning for kids needs to be done online. So again, thank you all so much for joining us. Be sure to get in touch with us if you have any other questions about this topic of your social brain and social media. And if you're interested in the topic of children and technology, please join us at the same time and the same place next week. Thank you, guys. Take care.